When Taehyung's secret marriage is exposed to the world, Jungkook's heart shatters because he finds out after everyone else. The thunder cracked across the Seoul skyline, splitting the night like a wound. Jungkook stood frozen under the awning outside the Hybe building. Phone still trembling in his hand. Screen still lit with the breaking notification that didn't feel real. Taehyung reveals secret marriage in surprise post. The words stared back at him like a stranger's face. His breath caught. His vision blurred. The street noise vanished under the roar of blood pounding in his ears. His thumb hovered over the screen, refusing to swipe up, refusing to believe. But there it was, Taehyung's Instagram post. A photo, a hand, a ring, and a caption that simply read, "Kept this for ourselves. Now it's time." The comments were flooding in armies in chaos, media outlets tagging everyone, members being mentioned except him. Jungkook's name was nowhere. Not in the tag, not in the caption, not in the comment, not even in the photo memories that followed in the carousel. Blurry laughs in dim hotel rooms, a distant beach shot, a cafe table for two. His lungs ached. When had it happened? Where was he? What had he missed? And why? Why didn't Taehyung tell him? Inside the building, the rest of the team were still gathered, some celebrating a recent deal, others in quiet conversation. But Jungkook couldn't step back in. Not like this. Not while his knees threatened to give way and his throat clenched with something more than confusion. Betrayal wasn't the right word. It was heavier than that. Colder. He replayed the last month in his mind. Had Taehyung been acting differently? More distant? Or just careful? He remembered a moment backstage 2 weeks ago. Taehyung had gotten a call, smiled at the screen, answered softly, voice low. He had walked away mid-conversation, brushing Jungkook off with a pat to the shoulder. "Just a quick thing," he'd said. Jungkook didn't think much of it then. Now he did. The elevator doors opened behind him, but Jungkook didn't turn. A voice followed. "You saw it?" He didn't need to ask who it was. Jimin stepped into the rain light beside him, umbrella over both their heads. Face unreadable. Jungkook couldn't answer. His throat was dry, tongue heavy. "I found out yesterday," Jimin murmured, almost guiltily. He said he needed time, said he wasn't ready to let everyone know yet. "Everyone?" Jungkook's voice finally cracked, low and tight. "Was I not part of everyone?" The silence that followed was damning. Jimin looked down. "He said he didn't know how to tell you." The umbrella trembled in his hand as Jungkook exhaled. "I would have been happy for him," he whispered, "if he'd just told me." Jimin's expression softened. "I think that's what scared him." The rain began to fall harder now, blurring the neon reflections on the slick pavement. Jungkook didn't move. The questions piled in his mind, but one dug deepest. Not about when Taehyung got married, not even who it was, but why him? Why he? Of all people, the one who had shared everything with Taehyung for over a decade was left in the dark. Back in his apartment that night, Jungkook sat in the glow of the single lamp by the window, scrolling through the flood of online reactions. News articles, tweets, edits, fan theories. And then he saw it. A blurry, almost candid video clip from a small ceremony in France, tagged under a private fan account. The video showed Taehyung, dressed in ivory, walking across a garden. The woman beside him smiled as if she belonged in his world. Guests clapped. Someone laughed. The camera jerked as a hand reached out to take Taehyung's gentle, practiced, intimate. Jungkook paused the clip. The moment froze there. Taehyung looked so content, so sure, and Jungkook couldn't even recognize the version of him standing in that frame. He should have known. He should have known. That night, Jungkook didn't sleep. Memories stabbed at him, concerts, shared hotel rooms, the way they'd instinctively known each other's mood with just a glance. The nights they talked about dreams, about family, about love. And yet none of those conversations had led here, to this. He tapped open his messages. Their last chat was 3 days ago. Taehyung had sent a photo of a cat perched on a ledge and captioned it, "This is you when someone takes your coffee." Jungkook had replied with a laugh emoji and a voice note teasing him. No mention of rings. No hint of final chapters. The next day, their manager called a meeting. Jungkook arrived late. Everyone else was already seated. Taehyung wasn't there. Instead, a single white envelope sat on the table addressed to him. Jungkook's fingers hesitated before picking it up. The others respectfully looked away. Even Jimin didn't try to peek. The room was eerily quiet. He opened it. Inside, one line handwritten in Taehyung's neat script. I was scared you'd try to stop me. Jungkook's hestsebed. He folded the note slowly, hands trembling, eyes burning. After the meeting, Jimin walked beside him, silent for most of the hallway. Then, just as they reached the lobby, he asked quietly, "Would you have?" Jungkook didn't answer, but his silence said everything. The next few weeks unfolded like a blur. Press events, rumors, speculation. Taehyung didn't return to Seoul immediately. He was in Europe, reportedly working on an art collaboration. Or maybe just avoiding the noise. Avoiding him. Jungkook didn't chase, but he couldn't run from it either. It was during one of their sound checks that Taehyung finally came back. The room stilled as he walked in, hair longer, skin slightly sun-kissed, expression unreadable. Jungkook felt the air shift. They didn't speak at first, not even during rehearsals, but eyes met and stayed. Later, alone backstage, Taehyung approached slowly. His voice was soft. "You're not going to say anything?" Jungkook looked at him, truly looked, and found someone familiar and foreign all at once. "You didn't give me a chance," he murmured. To say anything before, Taehyung swallowed hard. "I thought you'd hate me." Jungkook shook his head. "No, I just didn't think you'd erase me." That hit. Taehyung flinched. "I never meant to," he whispered. "I was scared that if I told you, it'd hurt more. That I'd what?" Jungkook cut in. "Tell you how I feel?" Taehyung froze. It was the first time either of them had said anything close to it. Years of glances, inside jokes, quiet moments, and none of it ever named. Jungkook let the silence hang for a beat too long. Then he stepped back. "You didn't just keep your marriage from the world," he said. "You kept it from me, and that's something I don't know how to forgive yet." He didn't wait for a reply. Taehyung stood alone, shadows painting his face in muted golds and grays. He didn't follow. Later, fans would talk about how Jungkook looked different in that performance, more raw, more distant. Taehyung's smile didn't reach his eyes. Jimin stood between them on stage, as if balancing a fragile glass wall. Time passed. The headlines faded, but the silence between them remained less like absence and more like a wound healing crooked. And even if the world had moved on, Jungkook hadn't. Because love, when unspoken, never truly disappears. It just waits aching in the spaces between what was said and what should have been. The studio was almost empty that evening. The kind of silence that didn't soothe but unsettled. A quiet that pressed against Jungkook's skin like cold mist. He sat in the corner where he used to rehearse with Taehyung, the same spot where they once laughed over choreography slips and late-night ramyeon cravings. But now, that corner felt like a grave of a friendship, of trust, of something deeper he never had the courage to name. The faint buzz of the lights above did nothing to fill the void. His phone lay face down beside him, unread messages piling in like rain on a window. Everyone had something to say. Fans, managers, even the other members had started gently reaching out. But not Taehyung. Not a word. Not since that short confrontation backstage weeks ago. And not since Jungkook walked away. A knock came at the side door, soft, hesitant. He didn't answer. It creaked open anyway. Namjoon stepped in, wearing that quiet, knowing look that made Jungkook feel both seen and stripped bare. "You're still here," Namjoon said simply, voice low. Jungkook didn't look up, didn't feel like going home. Namjoon walked over, sat a few feet away without pushing. He let the silence settle again, respectful of Jungkook's space. That was something he always did well, knowing when to speak, and when just to be there. "I saw the performance clips," Namjoon finally said. "You and him. It was hard to watch." "It was hard to do," Jungkook murmured. His fingers traced the edge of his phone, a habit he hadn't realized until now. Namjoon nodded. "You know, it's not just about the marriage, is it?" Jungkook flinched, but didn't respond. It's about the years before that. The things left unsaid. The way we assume there's time to fix everything until one day, there's not. Jungkook swallowed hard. I thought we were closer than that. You were, Namjoon said gently. Maybe that's why he couldn't say it. Because telling you made it real. Jungkook let out a hollow laugh, bitter at the edges. Or maybe I just didn't matter the way I thought I did. That's not true. You don't know that. I know him, Namjoon said with quiet certainty. And I know you. You mattered. Maybe more than anyone else. That silence again. Thick like storm clouds. Did you know who she is? Jungkook asked suddenly. Eyes still fixed on the floor. Namjoon hesitated. Yes. That single word hit harder than he expected. Jungkook's chest tightened. And you didn't tell me. It wasn't my place. I would have told you. The words escaped before he could stop them. Raw and sharp. Namjoon didn't flinch. Maybe. Or maybe you'd do the same thing he did, protect what you think might break if too many people knew. Jungkook hated how much sense that made. He hated how much he understood it. But understanding didn't lessen the hurt. It didn't explain the emptiness that had taken root in him since that post went live. He finally looked up, eyes meeting Namjoon's. Do you think he regrets not telling me? Namjoon didn't answer immediately. I think he regrets a lot of things. And I think you do too. The next morning, the sun rose behind thick clouds, casting a gray light over the city. Jungkook barely slept. He lay on his couch with a blanket tangled around his legs, still in the same clothes from yesterday. The TV played something muted in the background, but he wasn't watching. A message lit up his phone from Taehyung. I know you won't reply, but I'm at the place with the red roof. If you want to talk, I'll wait. Jungkook stared at it. His first instinct was to ignore it. But something in the wording, if you want to talk, I'll wait, unraveled a knot in his chest. The red roof. It was an old coffee shop they used to sneak off to during training days, back when they were just wide-eyed kids dreaming about stages and spotlights. Back when things were simpler. He sat frozen for a full minute. Then, without fully realizing it, he was already in the car. Hands gripping the wheel tighter than necessary. Heart a drumbeat of hesitation and unwanted hope. The coffee shop hadn't changed. The red awning was faded now, and the bell above the door gave the same jingle it always had. Taehyung sat at the back booth, alone, 2 cups of coffee in front of him. His head snapped up as the bell rang. For a second, neither of them moved. Jungkook didn't sit. He stood across the table, watching Taehyung's face, searching for answers, anger, anything. Taehyung gestured to the seat. I got you the vanilla one. You used to like that. I still do, Jungkook said, quietly. He sat. They stared at each other over the cups of coffee. The silence between them more deafening than the rain outside. You look tired, Taehyung finally said. Jungkook huffed. So do you. A beat. Then a tiny, almost laugh from Taehyung. Guess neither of us slept much. Jungkook didn't return the smile. His voice was even, but low. Why didn't you tell me? Taehyung exhaled. Because I was scared. Of what? That you'd look at me differently. That it would change something. That I'd lose you. You lost me anyway, Jungkook whispered. Taehyung flinched. I know. Another silence, this time heavier. Jungkook broke it. When did it happen? 4 months ago, in Provence. Jungkook blinked. 4 months? Taehyung nodded, voice quieter. We'd been planning it for a while. Her family, it was all kept small, private. And I wasn't even... Jungkook stopped himself. His jaw clenched. You were on tour in Japan. I thought about telling you. So many times. You should have. I know. There was something in Taehyung's eyes than regret. Yes, but more than that. Shame. And buried underneath it, something else Jungkook couldn't name. I didn't just lose a friend, Jungkook said, his voice barely audible. I lost the person I thought would always choose me. Taehyung leaned forward, elbows on the table. You weren't supposed to lose me, but I did. Taehyung closed his eyes. I wish I could undo it. You can't, I know. They sat there until the coffee went cold. After a long while, Taehyung reached into his coat and pulled out something small, a chain. Jungkook recognized it instantly. It was a pendant they once bought together, years ago, in Tokyo. A spur-of-the-moment thing. A joke at the time, matching necklaces, like a drama couple, Taehyung had teased. Jungkook hadn't worn his in years, but he never threw it away. I kept it, Taehyung said, placing it on the table. Jungkook staredatit. I don't know what happens next, Taehyung continued. But I needed you to know that none of this, none of her, none of the marriage erased what we had. What did we have? Jungkook asked, and for the first time his voice cracked. Because I thought I knew. Taehyung looked down, then quietly, so did I. Neither of them had the answer, not in that moment, maybe not ever, but they stayed there for hours. Even after the rain stopped, even after the shop began to close. Talking, arguing, pausing, talking again, and though nothing was fully mended, and trust was not instantly restored, something broke open in both of them, an understanding that pain didn't vanish with time, but it could be shared. Slowly, softly. That night, Jungkook walked home alone, the necklace still clenched in his hand. And for the first time in weeks, he didn't feel completely hollow, not healed, but not lost either. The sky above Seoul deepened into shades of violet and indigo, as Jungkook walked slowly along the narrow sidewalk lined with street lamps that flickered like unsure thoughts. The necklace rested inside his jacket pocket now, warm from the heat of his palm and heavier than any metal should feel. Cars passed in blurs of light and sound, but they didn't register. All he could hear was the echo of Taehyung's voice in that coffee shop, soft, remorseful, honest in the ways that came too late. His phone buzzed again. A group message from their manager. Something about rescheduled press events and rehearsal times. He read it without absorbing a word, then locked the screen and slipped it back into his pocket. Across the street, two boys in their early teens ran, shouting over the thundering beat of a BTS song playing from a nearby store. Jungkook saw the way one of them mimicked dance moves with joyful abandon, the other laughing and shouting lyrics through a mouthful of tteokbokki. That used to be them. That used to be him and Taehyung. But things grow. Shift. Sometimes they snap in the places you never thought would crack. He reached his apartment and didn't turn on the lights as he entered. The faint blue glow from the aquarium in the corner gave the room a dreamy haze. The fish swam in slow spirals, unbothered, unaware. Jungkook sank onto the floor, back against the couch, head falling into his hands. He didn't cry, not because it didn't hurt, but because he'd cried enough. Now came the emptiness, the stillness that followed grief. It was strange, he thought. You could mourn someone who was still alive, someone you could see, someone whose voice still lingered in your voicemail. You could mourn what should have been said. Mourn the friendship before life got messy with rings and secrets and a world that demanded too much from the both of them. There was a knock at the door. He froze. For a second, the air held its breath. Then came another knock, softer, hesitant. He got up slowly, unsure if it was real or a trick of memory. The hallway light flickered above as he opened the door. It wasn't Taehyung. It was Yoongi. In his usual black hoodie and beanie, holding a small bag of takeout in one hand and a six-pack of cider in the other. Yoongi didn't say anything. He didn't have to. He just held up the bag and shrugged. Didn't think you ate. Jungkook stepped aside, lips twitching at the corners despite himself. They sat on the floor like they used to after practice sessions, plastic containers opened between them, music low in the background. Neither of them spoke for a while. The only sound, the quiet clink of chopsticks and the occasional fizz of the cider being opened. Finally, Yoongi leaned back and looked over at him. So, he said, you and Tae. Jungkook didn't answer immediately. You knew too, didn't you? Yoongi didn't lie. Yeah. Jungkook looked down. Am I the only one who didn't? It wasn't like that, Yoongi replied calmly. He didn't tell everyone. It just slipped. I caught it. Did you ask him why he hid it from me? Yoongi nodded slowly. I did, he said. He was afraid your reaction would change everything. Jungkook exhaled sharply. He was right. Yoongi leaned his head back against the couch. Yeah, but he also said something else. That no one knew him the way you did. Not even her. That if you looked at him differently, he'd lose something he'd never be able to replace. Jungkook swallowed hard. Then why replace it? Yoongi's gaze shifted to him. Maybe he wasn't trying to. Maybe he thought he could have both. And failed. There was a silence between them then. Not uncomfortable. Just full of unspoken things. Did he love her? Jungkook asked quietly. Yoongi didn't answer right away. I think he loves differently than you do. Not better. Not less. Just different. Jungkook looked away, jaw tight. And I thought I knew everything about him. You knew his soul, Yoongi said. But souls are messy. They change. Even when they don't want to. Jungkook picked up one of the ciders and turned it slowly in his hand. You're not mad because he got married, Yoongi said softly. You're mad because you weren't there. Jungkook didn't reply. You would have stood beside him, Yoongi continued. Even if it killed you. That's who you are. That's what he couldn't handle. It hit somewhere deep. Somewhere sore. I would've, Jungkook finally said. God, I would've. Yoongi's expression softened. I know. They didn't talk much after that. Yoongi stayed the night, dozing on the couch while Jungkook lay on the floor beneath a throw blanket, the necklace in his hand again. This time, he didn't hide it. He wore it. The next few days passed in a blur of rehearsals and meetings. The comeback stage was approaching fast, and their schedule was relentless. Jungkook threw himself into it, movements sharp, expressions precise, vocals on point. Everyone praised his professionalism, his energy. No one saw how each break backstage left him hollow. No one but Jimin. Jimin watched him with quiet concern, his own exhaustion written into the lines around his eyes. He didn't ask questions. He just stayed close. Until one night, after a late rehearsal, Jimin followed him into the parking lot and called his name. Jungkook turned. You haven't said how you're really feeling, Jimin said. I'm fine. Don't leave. Jungkook exhaled, the cold air curling around his breath. What do you want me to say, Jimin? That it broke me? That every time I close my eyes, I see him at the altar with someone who isn't me? Jimin flinched. Jungkook's voice cracked. I didn't even know I cared that way. Not until it was too late. You did, Jimin said. You just buried it. Jungkook looked away. Have you told him that? Jimin asked. Jungkook shook his head. It wouldn't change anything. No, Jimin said. But it might change you. That night, Jungkook sat on his balcony. City lights spread before him like constellations. He opened his phone, scrolled through their old pictures, voice memos, Taehyung laughing in the back of a van, singing off-key in the studio, whispering something only Jungkook heard. He hit record. His voice was quiet, barely above a whisper. You should have told me. I would have stood there with you. I would have fixed your tie. I would have smiled for the cameras. And after it all, I would have come home and cried alone. Because that's what people do when they love someone they can't have. They stay, even when it hurts. He deleted the recording before it's saved. But for the first time, the weight lifted a little. The following week, they stood on stage again. Taehyung stood at the opposite end, microphone in hand, eyes scanning the crowd until they met Jungkook's. And for just a second, something passed between them. Not anger, not regret, something like forgiveness. Or maybe just a start. The stage lights dimmed to a low golden hue, casting long shadows on the wooden floor beneath their feet. Jungkook's in-ear buzzed softly with the countdown cue, but his focus was fixed ahead, not on the audience, not on the cameras, but on the man standing across from him. Taehyung, still, poised, brilliant beneath the glow, his face unreadable, his hand clenched at his side. There were thousands of fans in the crowd, light sticks swaying like waves, but in that moment, it felt like the entire world narrowed into a silent corridor between the two of them. All the years, all the secrets, the laughter, the betrayals converging in this precise point in time. Jungkook took the first step forward, not part of the choreography, but instinct. Not planned, not scripted. Taehyung didn't move. The music started. The opening notes were soft, bittersweet, an unreleased ballad they'd decided to perform as a surprise. A song written long ago and shelved indefinitely. Jungkook remembered the night they'd composed it in a small studio, wrapped in layers of nostalgia and what-ifs. Back then, The lyrics were hypothetical. Tonight, they weren't. His voice broke the silence first. He sang the verse like it bled out of him. The kind of singing that wasn't meant to impress, but to survive. If I had known the last time we talked would be goodbye. Taehyung joined him on the next line, his tone low and almost trembling. I would have said everything I never dared to. The crowd didn't cheer. They listened, held their breath. It wasn't just a performance. It was a confession. Jimin stood just off stage, watching with clenched fists, his heart in his throat. He knew what this was. Everyone did. Every member backstage. Every staffer who had watched this slow fracture unfold. And now, this song wasn't just a melody. It was history unraveling in front of them, thread by aching thread. Jungkook didn't look away from Taehyung the entire time. And Taehyung, despite the cameras, despite the tears he fought to hold back, didn't either. The final note hung in the air like a breath suspended between them. When it faded, silence fell like snow. And then, the crowd erupted, not in screams, but in something deeper. Chants, emotion, a rumble of unity and pain. They felt it. After the curtain closed, Jungkook walked off stage first, heart racing as if he had sprinted a marathon, hands cold and clammy. He pushed past stylists, nodding absently, and headed straight toward the dressing rooms. The hallway echoed with footsteps and distant shouts from crew members, but everything felt muffled. Then he heard it, footsteps behind him, unmistakable. He didn't stop walking until the familiar voice cut through the air. Wait. He stopped. Taehyung's voice was breathless. I didn't know we were going to sing that one. Jungkook turned, expression unreadable. Neither did I. It just felt like time. Taehyung stepped closer. You meant what you sang? Jungkook didn't blink. Didn't you? There was silence.
I did, Taehyung admitted, every word. Jungkook looked down at the floor, chest rising and falling. Why now, T? Why tonight? Why are we only telling the truth when there's a melody to carry it? Taehyung looked like he wanted to answer, but his mouth opened and closed again, eyes full of things too heavy to say out loud. I loved you, you know, Jungkook whispered. Before the world knew your name, before the suits, before the smiles. I loved the boy who painted on his bedroom walls, who laughed so hard he'd cry. I would have followed him anywhere. Taehyung's face fell. His hands twitched by his sides. I didn't know how to choose between love and peace. You didn't have to, Jungkook said, voice sharp. You just had to be honest. I was scared, Taehyung said, because every time I looked at you, I saw the rest of my life, and that kind of clarity terrifies people who aren't ready. Jungkook laughed, but it was hollow, and yet you married someone else. Taehyung didn't defend himself. Jungkook shook his head. You didn't just choose her, you chose a life without me. I didn't mean to, Taehyung whispered. But you did. The hallway stretched between them, sterile and humming with fluorescent light. I see your face in everything, Taehyung finally said, voice raw. In hotel mirrors, in train windows, in dreams I wish I could forget. Being married didn't stop that. Jungkook's breath hitched. You told me once, Taehyung continued, that music would outlast all of us. Maybe that's true. Maybe that's why I thought if I left things unsaid, the songs would speak for me. But they don't, Jungkook whispered. They can't hold you the way I did. Taehyung stepped forward, then hold me now. Jungkook's hands shook. You don't get to ask that. Taehyung stopped, crushed by the weight of the refusal. Do you still love me? The question was simple, heavy, laced with history. Jungkook didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked into Taehyung's eyes, and for a moment it all rushed back. The rooftop confessions, the late-night calls, the way their laughter used to echo like magic. The way Taehyung once touched his shoulder when he thought no one was looking. All of it, every shard. I will always love you, Jungkook said, but I won't destroy myself to prove it anymore. The silence after that felt like an earthquake. No explosion, just the long, deep tremble of something collapsing quietly. I should go, Jungkook added. He walked past Taehyung slowly, close enough that their arms brushed. Taehyung stood still. But he didn't follow. The months that followed were quiet, polite interactions, shared stages, interviews where they smiled in sync but never looked at each other too long. Fans noticed. The world speculated, but no one knew the full story. Only they did. Jungkook poured his soul into a solo project, an album that bore no names but carried every ache. The songs were layered with metaphor, subtle references, whispers of love and loss. The world hailed it as his most personal work yet. Taehyung didn't say anything publicly. But one night, a handwritten note arrived at Jungkook's door. "Track 7 broke me. I hope it healed you." No signature, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Jungkook stared at it for a long time. And smiled just a little. Because love doesn't always end with a kiss. Sometimes it ends with silence. And sometimes silence is love too. The days bled into each other like a painting left in the rain, color streaking across time until even Jungkook could no longer tell where one emotion ended and the next began. Morning light didn't carry hope the way it used to. It simply arrived, unapologetic, steady, indifferent to the heaviness sitting in his chest. The apartment felt quieter now, not because sound had vanished, but because meaning had. His plants wilted a little from neglect. The coffee went cold before he could remember drinking it. And music, once the thing that grounded him, healed him, moved through him like a second heartbeat, now sat mute in the corners of his studio, untouched. He wrote at night when the city sighed beneath the weight of its own stillness. The lyrics came in broken lines and half-truths, sometimes about Taehyung, sometimes not, but always from a place just left of pain, closer to surrender. The kind of surrender that didn't look like waving a white flag but rather sitting in the ruins and choosing not to rebuild. There was one song he kept returning to, over and over, a stripped-down melody, bare piano and strings with a single haunting phrase that repeated in the chorus. "You loved me when you couldn't say it, and I stayed when I shouldn't have." Each time he sang it, his throat burned like it was swallowing glass. He never hit record. One evening, the doorbell rang. Not the intercom, not a text, a direct knock on his front door, sharp, hesitant. He waited a beat, then two. When he opened the door, he wasn't surprised, not really. Taehyung stood there, hair slightly longer, eyes darker than he remembered. Not tired exactly, but not bright either, like something in him had permanently dimmed. He held no umbrella, even though the rain behind him came down in sheets. His hoodie clung to him, soaked through, but he didn't seem to notice. "Can I come in?" Taehyung asked. Jungkook hesitated, then stepped aside. The door clicked shut behind them. Taehyung didn't speak immediately. He looked around the apartment as if cataloging everything that had changed. Same furniture, same scent, but quieter now. Less like a home, more like a museum of someone who used to live fully. "I listened to the whole album," Taehyung said finally. His voice wasn't trembling, but something behind it was. Jungkook didn't reply. "That last track," Taehyung continued, "the one you didn't name, is it about me?" Jungkook didn't look up. "Does it matter?" "It does to me." He exhaled through his nose, slow and steady. Then yes. A pause. Taehyung stepped closer, but not too close. "You always said music was the one place you couldn't lie." "I still can't." "I'm sorry," Taehyung said. "I know I keep saying that, but it doesn't feel like enough." "It's not." The silence between them was brutal. "I didn't come to ask for forgiveness," Taehyung said quietly. "I came because I think we never said goodbye." Jungkook's hands curled into fists. "You said goodbye the moment you chose not to tell me." "I said nothing," Taehyung whispered, "and that was worse." They stood in the center of the living room, the hum of the city muffled by thick windows, the air thick with everything that had ever gone unsaid. "You know," Jungkook said after a long time, "I kept thinking maybe one day you'd show up. Maybe you knock and we'd talk and somehow I'd feel better." Do you? Jungkook's eyes met his. No. Taehyung nodded slowly, as if he expected that answer but needed to feel the wound anyway. I miss you, he said, even when I'm with her, especially when I'm with her. Jungkook flinched, something sharp moving through him like wind through broken glass. You're married, he said flatly. Taehyung nodded. You don't get to miss me. I never stopped missing you. That doesn't make it right. I know. Jungkook turned away, walking toward the window. The city below blinked with lights like stars drowning in concrete. His reflection hovered faintly in the glass, Taehyung's behind it. We were never supposed to end like this, Jungkook murmured. We weren't supposed to end at all. But we did. He heard Taehyung step closer. I still dream of you, every night. You're always wearing that blue hoodie, the one you stole from my closet, and laughing like nothing ever broke us. Jungkook swallowed. That dream doesn't bring us back. No, Taehyung said, but maybe it reminds me of who we were, of what we meant. You're always good with poetry, Jungkook whispered. You just weren't good at staying. Taehyung didn't deny it. And maybe that was the hardest truth. They sat in silence on the couch after that, the space between them heavy but not hostile. The kind of silence where everything had already been said, and what lingered was only the echo. Do you love her? Jungkook asked suddenly. Taehyung's answer was soft. I do. Jungkook nodded, then love her fully. I can't unlove you, Taehyung admitted. Jungkook smiled sadly. I don't need you to. Taehyung looked at him, eyes glassy. What do you need? Jungkook thought for a moment, then said, I need to be someone again, without you as my gravity. Taehyung looked down at his hands. That's fair. There was no explosion, no dramatic tears, just the soft parting of two souls who had finally accepted that not all love stories are meant to last in the ways we want them to. Some live in memories, in songs, in the way one person can still break your heart with a glance. Even after all this time. When Taehyung stood to leave, he looked at Jungkook like he was seeing him for the first time all over again, as if he were memorizing him, not the idol, not the performer, just the boy he once shared everything with. Jungkook walked him to the door. Taehyung paused before stepping out. Will we ever talk again? Jungkook smiled, soft and tired. Maybe, but not as who we were. Then as who we are now. If we're lucky. The door closed with a soft click. And Jungkook stood there for a long time, hand resting on the doorknob, feeling the ghost of everything they used to be slipping quietly through the cracks. But when he turned around, something felt lighter. Not healed, but freer. That night he opened his laptop, opened the folder of half-finished tracks, the one he hadn't touched in months. He clicked on a file titled, For When It's Over. And for the first time he pressed record. The screen's soft glow reflected in Jungkook's eyes as the cursor blinked steadily on the blank track. Outside, the city whispered through the windows, buses sighing, neon signs humming, footsteps echoing in alleyways, 1,000 lives unknowingly sharing his quiet ache. He adjusted the mic, his fingers trembling slightly as they hovered above the keys. The room smelled faintly of cedar and cold rain, and something about it made him feel 12 years old again, hiding in the practice rooms long after curfew, trying to make sense of a world far too big for his fragile heart. He closed his eyes. And he sang. Not words at first, just sound, breath, pain that had been trapped for months, maybe years, a low, raw tone that stretched through the silence like a wound being reopened willingly. Then slowly, carefully, words began to form. They weren't polished. They weren't clever, but they were real. I waited for the storm to pass, but you became the rain. He didn't write the lyrics down, he let them come. Let them twist and trip and tremble, each line scraped straight from the inside, every syllable a fracture, every note a confession. He forgot time, forgot sleep, Forgot that just hours ago, the only person who had ever known him completely stood in this very room, said goodbye with eyes instead of words, and walked into a life that didn't have space for him anymore. When he finally stepped back from the mic, the sky outside was fading into morning. Pale blue threaded between the buildings, and for the first time in weeks, he didn't feel like it was mocking him. He didn't cry. He didn't need to. The song had done it for him. He saved the file without nomming it, just track 31. And for the first time, it didn't feel like he was preserving pain. It felt like he was letting it go. Later that morning, Jimin dropped by unannounced, 2 iced coffees in hand, no questions in his eyes, just that quiet empathy he carried like armor. Jungkook opened the door, still in last night's hoodie, hair tousled, eyes glassy. "I made something," Jungkook said. Jimin nodded once. "Play it for me." So he did. They sat on the floor together, backs against the wall, listening. The track wasn't mastered. It was full of breath sounds, uneven volume, and unfiltered grief. But it was real. When it ended, Jimin didn't speak for a long time. Then he said, "That sounds like the truth." Jungkook looked down. "It is." Jimin exhaled slowly. "Then it needs to be heard." They didn't talk about Taehyung, not directly, but the silence between their words was thick with his name. Jimin didn't push. He never did. Instead, he stayed for hours, letting Jungkook exist without expectations, without smiles, without anything but breath and space and quiet presence. That night, HYBE sent a formal message to the group chat. An offer for an upcoming international collaboration project had landed, an emotionally driven acoustic-style campaign. They wanted Jungkook to lead the concept. They wanted sincerity, vulnerability, something human. He stared at the message for a while before replying with a single word, "I'll do it." Days passed, then weeks, and Jungkook slowly began to build again. Not a new version of himself, not a reinvention, but a reclamation. He dyed his hair darker, started running every morning even when his chest protested. He showed up to rehearsals early, stayed late at the studio, said no to interviews that wanted to dig into his heart, and yes to ones that asked about the music. Fans noticed the shift. They said he looked more focused, more distant, but more powerful, like someone who had shed an old skin and stepped out raw but luminous. Taehyung remained quiet. No Instagram posts. No press statements. No accidental sightings. It was as if he'd vanished. Until one evening, 2 months later, Jungkook stepped out of the studio and found a package waiting in his car. No label, no name, just a small black box wrapped in worn twine. Inside was a handwritten note, the paper soft with creases, the ink a little smudged, but the handwriting was familiar. "I saw the interview, heard the song. You once said our story wasn't over, it was just waiting for a bridge. I understand now. You were the chorus, I was just the silence before it." Beneath the letter, a USB drive. Jungkook closed his fingers around it slowly, unsure if he should throw it into the Han River or plug it into his laptop and let it undo him again. That night, curiosity won. The video was simple, grainy footage, no edits, just Taehyung sitting in a room, maybe a hotel, maybe a studio, guitar in hand, face lit only by a desk lamp. He looked into the lens like he was speaking across time. "I didn't come back to fix us," he said. "I came back to thank you, for every day you loved me when I didn't know how to be loved, for standing beside me when I didn't deserve it. I'm still learning what it means to be brave. Maybe this is part of it." Then he played. A song Jungkook had never heard before. One written in Taehyung's unmistakable style, lazy rhythms, minor key, lyrics heavy with double meanings. But the chorus cut through like glass. "You were the fire I kept calling rain. I was the silence pretending to sing. But in another life, maybe I'd be brave enough to be yours completely." Jungkook didn't realize he was crying until the screen blurred. The song ended. Taehyung said nothing after. The video simply faded to black. He didn't reply. He didn't need to. The message had been sent and received. Weeks turned to months. Spring rolled into summer and the group prepared for a fan concert, one of the biggest events since the announcement of their upcoming hiatus. It would be a farewell in some sense, a love letter, a thank you. Jungkook showed up ready. He sang with everything in him. Every note carried weight. Every move had meaning. He watched fans cry, smile, chant his name like a promise, and he gave them his heart without holding back. Backstage, after the final encore, Taehyung approached quietly. They stood under the dim yellow lights of the corridor, the sound of thousands of fans still echoing faintly through the concrete walls. "I saw you out there," Taehyung said. "I wasn't hiding," Jungkook replied. "No," Taehyung said, "you were finally showing." Jungkook turned, eyes searching his. "Thank you," Taehyung said, voice thick, "for letting me go without making me the villain." "You were never the villain," Jungkook whispered, "just the chapter I had to stop rereading." Taehyung smiled, sad and full. "Do you think we'll ever find each other again?" "In this life?" Jungkook asked. "In any life." Jungkook considered the question, then nodded once. "If there's music there, I'll know it's you." They didn't hug. They didn't say goodbye. But they walked away with peace in their steps, the silence between them no longer filled with longing, but with memory. And as the door closed behind Jungkook, he realized he wasn't walking away from something anymore. He was walking toward himself. The summer air outside the venue clung to Jungkook's skin as he stepped into the darkness behind the stage, where the screams of thousands faded into a distant hum, like a memory slipping further away with each breath. Seoul pulsed under the starlit sky, alive and burning, but his chest felt strangely still. The energy he had just given, every lyric, every breath, every movement on stage, had been drawn from a place so raw it left him stripped, and yet not empty. He was not bleeding anymore, he was becoming. He walked past rows of staff members, bowed slightly to the lighting crew, nodded to the makeup team waiting with touch-up kits. Jimin caught his eye from down the hallway and raised a thumb, sweat glistening down his temple. Jin was laughing with Hobei about something to do with a fan sign board being upside down. Namjoon was already seated on a bench, sipping water, gaze heavy with thought but softened by pride. And Taehyung, he wasn't in sight anymore. Not now, maybe not for a while, and that was okay. The dressing room was quiet when Jungkook entered. His name was stenciled across the door, but it didn't feel like ownership. It felt like a chapter, a room he'd leave again soon. He sat in front of the mirror, removed the mic pack from the back of his shirt and stared at his reflection. His jaw was sharper now. His eyes held more lines. The boy from a decade ago, the one who used to steal glances at Taehyung when no one noticed, was gone. But the man who remained still carried the echo of that boy's heart, only steadier now, less afraid of what it meant to love without conditions. His phone buzzed. One message. From Taehyung. No words, just a photo. A stage shot, backlit, grainy, taken from Taehyung's angle. Jungkook stood in the center of the frame, eyes closed, mouth open mid-note, the lights creating a halo around his figure. There was something reverent about it, like worship. He stared at it for a long time. And then, without replying, he locked the screen and placed it face down on the vanity. Because sometimes the answer wasn't in continuing the conversation, but in finally allowing the silence to mean everything. The days after the concert moved differently, slower, softer. HYBE announced the hiatus officially. No drama, no tears, just gratitude and the promise of rest. Jungkook didn't rush into new schedules. He disappeared for a few weeks, traveled, walked through quiet streets in Kyoto wearing a plain black hoodie, unrecognized, unbothered, sat by the Seine in Paris and wrote nonsense into a travel journal, laughed with strangers at an underground jazz bar in New York who had no idea who he was. It was there in that bar that he saw someone singing with eyes closed, raw, unpolished, real. And he remembered what music was before the contracts, before the cameras, just someone telling the truth because they didn't know how not to. When he returned to Korea, he moved into a smaller apartment. No skyline view, no smart systems, just wood floors, white curtains, and a piano in the corner by the window. He started baking again, burned things at first, then got better. He went days without opening social media, didn't miss the attention, only missed the parts that had been real. One morning, he walked into a small record store tucked between a bookstore and a bike shop. He wasn't looking for anything in particular, just air and distraction. The owner, a woman in her 60s, asked if he played music. He smiled politely and said sometimes. She didn't recognize him. She offered him tea anyway. That's how he found himself returning to that shop weekly, talking about vinyls, recommending tracks, listening, learning. Sometimes she let him sit behind the register and organize the jazz section. She reminded him of his grandmother, sharp eyes, kind silence. She never asked about his past. She only asked what he was listening to now. He told her, mostly silence. She nodded and said, "That's where the best songs begin." By autumn, he'd written 3 new songs, none of them about heartbreak, all of them about beginnings. One was called Open Window, one was called White Thread. The third didn't have a title. He didn't rush to release them, didn't think about charts, he just let them be. Then one night, he got an invitation in the mail. Not a message, not a DM. An actual envelope, cream-colored, gold embossed. It was from Taehyung. He stared at it for a long time before opening it. It was a gallery showing, private viewing, invitation only. Taehyung's first solo exhibition, photography and film installation. The card was minimal, no sentimental notes, just time, place, and the phrase, "We capture what we can't say." Jungkook held the invitation in his hand until the edges softened. He didn't know if he would go. Didn't know if he should. But when the night came, he found himself dressed in all black, a low cap pulled over his hair, slipping past the crowd at the entrance without a word. The gallery was quiet, white walls, tall ceilings, music playing in the background, soft, ambient, haunting. Jungkook moved slowly. Photographs lined the walls, some abstract, some intimate, some almost too familiar. Then he reached one that made him stop. It was him. Not clearly, but enough. A photo taken from behind years ago during rehearsals. Sweat staining his back, his head bowed, body curled inward like a question. The frame was cropped, grainy, imperfect. The caption below read, "The moment before he broke, I wanted to hold him, I didn't." Jungkook didn't know how long he stood there. But when he turned, Taehyung was watching from across the room. They didn't speak. They didn't wave. Just stood, acknowledging. The gallery faded around them. The crowd, the noise, the past, all blurred. Later, as Jungkook left, he passed by a table of booklets, a collection of Taehyung's writing to accompany the exhibit. He picked one up. The last page had a handwritten note. Not signed, but meant for someone. "I loved you in still frames because I didn't know how to love you in motion." Jungkook folded the page, placed it in his coat pocket, and walked out into the Seoul night, a quiet smile on his lips. Not because everything had healed, but because some loves didn't end. They simply became art. The air outside smelled like faint wood smoke and wet asphalt. The sky was low and silver, clouds heavy but not yet breaking, and Jungkook walked with slow, deliberate steps beneath the pale streetlights that stretched shadows across the pavement like faded brushstrokes. He didn't rush. He didn't even check his phone. The silence inside him had matured, no longer the silence of grief or aftermath, but something quieter, more respectful. Like standing in a museum of his own life, no longer needing to smash the glass to touch what once was. It was enough now to remember, to feel, to accept. Each step away from the gallery didn't feel like distance. It felt like a loop finally closing. He paused at the edge of the Han River, where the dark water curled against the concrete like a secret. There was a bench near the railing, the same one he had once sat on years ago with Taehyung in the early hours of their fame, sharing earbuds, the city still unfamiliar and thrilling. That night they talked about everything: music, dreams, the fear of fatting too fast. Taehyung had said something Jungkook never forgot. "If one day we lose each other, I hope we still find each other in what we create." Now, all these years later, he realized that wasn't just a wish. It had become a prophecy. He sat down, pulled the folded booklet from his coat, and reread that single line at the back. "I loved you in still frames because I didn't know how to love you in motion." The ink was uneven, the pen pressure inconsistent, like it had been written with a trembling hand. He imagined Taehyung hunched at a desk, the lamp warm on his skin, writing not for display, not for praise, but for closure. Or maybe for communion. Jungkook ran his thumb over the edge of the paper. He didn't feel bitterness. Not anymore. What he felt now was clarity. The understanding that some stories didn't have a second act, not because they lacked the passion, but because they had already said all they needed to say. And continuing would only dilute what had been sacred. Back at home, the apartment was dark except for the small nightlight he kept by the piano. The keys glowed slightly under its soft aura, inviting him closer like an old friend. He sat without turning on anything else. No phone, no camera. Just fingers on ivory. He didn't play a song he'd written. He didn't play anything rehearsed. He just let his hands move. Simple chords, raw, unstructured. Something between goodbye and forgiveness. When he finally stopped, it was nearly 3 a.m. He closed the lid, stood, and walked to the window. From where he stood, he could see the far side of the city, the rooftop lights of distant buildings, the red glow of a radio tower blinking gently above the skyline. Somewhere out there, Taehyung was asleep, or maybe awake, thinking of the same bench by the river, the same echo in the gallery hall. They were not lovers. They were not enemies. They were not a tragedy. They were simply what happened when two stars collided too close to the ground. In the following weeks, Jungkook released a new track. It had no teaser, no campaign, just a midnight drop on SoundCloud with no visuals, no title, just the date. It spread like wildfire. Fans called it the most vulnerable thing he's ever written. Because it was. The song opened with the soft sound of breathing. Then a single line, "You can love someone and still let them go." And the rest unfolded like a dream you couldn't remember clearly, only the feeling it left behind, the ache, the warmth, the afterglow. It wasn't about Taehyung. It wasn't not about him either. It was about everything. Jimin sent him a message at 2:15 a.m. "You're healing, I can hear it." Jungkook replied with a heart. Nothing more needed. Later that year, Jungkook stood in a recording booth in Los Angeles, laying down vocals for a global campaign. The producers were amazed at how quickly he translated emotion. They didn't know what he'd been through. They only knew he gave them gold. In the corner of the studio, a canvas was leaned against the wall. It was a gift from one of the photographers involved in the project, a wide shot of Seoul at dusk. In the very corner of the photo, almost hidden, was a silhouette on a rooftop. The photographer hadn't noticed it until post-edit. Jungkook stared at it for a long time. He didn't need to ask if it was Taehyung. He didn't need confirmation. Some connections live beyond proof. One afternoon, during a radio interview for the campaign, the host asked a question off script. If you could say one thing to someone you lost but still think about, what would it be? Jungkook didn't flinch. He smiled. "I'd say thank you for loving me the best way you could, even when it wasn't forever." The host was quiet for a beat, then moved on. But the clip went viral. Fans knew. Not because he named anyone, but because they felt it. One comment under the clip simply read, "That wasn't an answer, that was closure in disguise." Jungkook liked it. He didn't say more, because silence in the end had become his language. And the world was finally listening. The hotel room was dim and silent save for the low hum of the city through the tall windows. Jungkook stood barefoot on the cool wooden floor, a glass of water untouched in his hand, the curtains shifting with the gentle breeze of the air conditioning. He had arrived in Tokyo 2 days ago for a collaboration shoot. Everything was scheduled down to the minute: press, rehearsal, recording, then rest. But the rest never truly came. Not the kind that sleep brought. Not the kind that turned off the noise inside his chest. Outside, the sky glowed faintly with approaching dawn, the city slowly rising like a breath drawn after a long night. He leaned against the window frame and looked down at the streets, the taxis crawling through traffic, the people beginning their lives, unaware of the ghosts he carried. There was a letter on the nightstand, cream paper, handwritten, no return name. It had arrived in the mailroom at HYBE weeks ago and had followed him city to city. The envelope was unsealed now, its edges frayed from hesitation. He'd read it so many times he could recite it in his sleep. "You once told me you'd rather feel everything than nothing at all. I didn't understand that then. I do now." He hadn't responded. He wouldn't. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been sung, painted, captured in trembling film, or swallowed in silence. The world around him saw a man evolving, ascending. His solo career was flourishing. Collaborations were pouring in. Brands, campaigns, films. Everything he had once feared slipping away was now folding into his hands like it had been waiting for him all along. But none of it had the weight of the one thing he could never hold. He stepped back from the window and sat on the edge of the bed, pressing the heels of his palms into his eyes. Somewhere across the ocean, Taehyung was living a different kind of truth. The quiet kind, the domestic kind. There had been a photograph that surfaced, a fleeting shot of him walking through a farmer's market in the south of France. Sunglasses, linen shirt, a hand linked through his arm. Fans speculated, theories bloomed and wilted by morning. But Jungkook didn't look closely. Not because it hurt, but because he didn't want to reduce Taehyung to someone who needed to be understood through pixels anymore. They had lived through enough of that. Later that evening, after a full day of press, Jungkook found himself alone in a rooftop bar. He wasn't drinking, just sitting in a corner booth, hoodie pulled low, watching the city lights shimmer on the bay. The voice that came from across the table startled him, not because it was unfamiliar, but because it wasn't supposed to be here. "I thought I'd find you here." He looked up. It was Jimin. No cameras, no stylist, just his friend. Jungkook let out a breath. "You flew in." Jimin slid into the seat across from him. "They said you hadn't been talking to anyone." "I didn't have anything new to say." Jimin ordered a drink, then rested his elbows on the table studying him. "That's never stopped you before." Jungkook looked away. "Did you see the gallery closed?" Jimin asked. He hadn't. They said it was only supposed to run for 3 weeks. It stayed open for 4 months. Jimin tapped his fingers lightly. People lined up around the block. Some thought it was about fame, some about nostalgia. "But it wasn't," Jungkook said quietly. "No," Jimin agreed. "It was about you." The statement hung between them like a truth too heavy to touch. "I've been writing again," Jungkook said after a while. Jimin smiled. "Good. Not songs." "What then?" Jungkook looked out over the city. "Letters to myself, to who I was." Jimin's voice softened. "And to him?" "No," Jungkook said, shaking his head. "Because the things I needed to say to him I already did, even if he wasn't there." The drink arrived. Neither of them touched it. "He still loves you, you know," Jimin said. "I know. Does that make it easier?" "No," Jungkook said, "but it makes it less lonely." They left the bar past midnight. walked in silence through the back streets of the city, hands in pockets, heads low. The kind of walk that didn't need conversation, just presence, just proof they were still here, still moving, even with everything they carried. Before parting, Jimin turned to him. If you ever decide to say something, anything, he'll hear it. I don't think I want to be heard anymore, Jungkook said. I just want to be understood. Jimin nodded once, pulled him into a hug, and left without another word. The next morning, Jungkook opened his notebook and wrote the first poem that didn't ache. It wasn't about Taehyung. It wasn't about loss. It was about the boy he used to be, brave, quiet, hungry for love, and how he had forgiven him for not knowing how to ask for what he needed. He titled it Stillness is Not Emptiness. That winter he released a photo book. No interviews, no promotions, just a single handwritten note included with every copy. Thank you for letting me be quiet for a while. Inside the book were images he had taken over the last year, strangers, shadows, wide skis, moments that didn't need to be understood to be felt. Toward the end of the book, there was a single photo of a hand holding a pendant against a white linen shirt. Fans recognized it. It was the necklace, the same one that had once been a matching pair. The caption beneath it simply read, "Some things are never lost, only transformed." That spring, a fan posted a video from a small countryside station in France. A man with dark hair stood alone on the platform, camera slung around his neck, sketchbook in his hand. He was humming to himself. The clip only lasted 15 seconds. But it spread across the internet like fire. Because even from that distance, the voice in the clip was unmistakable. And the tune he hummed was one Jungkook had written but never released. Under the post, someone commented, "They never stopped making art about each other. They just learned to do it without needing to break." And maybe that was the truest form of love. Not the one that demands. Not the one that stays. But the one that creates quietly, without expectation. Because love, at its highest form, doesn't always need to be returned. Sometimes it just needs to be expressed.